Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Natalie Slachina, the Associate Deputy Director here at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. It's really wonderful to open a door and see a stream of people coming in. So thank you all for spending part of your Saturday afternoon on such a beautiful day with us. Today we're going to learn more about two of our current fiber artists, Candace Hicks and Kendall Ross. They both started, just in February and are here till the end of March. So I'm glad that you're end of April. No, end of May.
May, yeah.
Oh my God, I can't keep track. I need to have more coffee. So you still have nearly 2 months to catch them in their studios. So today we're going to start off with Candace Hicks. Candace is a multidisciplinary artist and educator whose work explores narrative, coincidence, and the act of reading through artist books and immersive installations. Her background in book arts and training as a printmaker through her MFA at Texas Christian University has led her to cultivate a distinctive practice that blurs the boundaries between literature and visual arts. Her work is held in over 90 collections worldwide, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Harvard University. One volume is permanently displayed at the New York Public Library in the Polinsky Collection of Treasures. A committed educator, she has taught design since 2012. She also has taught workshops in book arts and embroidery to international audiences, notably the Center for Book Arts in New York, and has recently completed a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Project in Omni, France. Candace, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello. So I'm kind of short, so I'm probably going to peek out from behind the computer periodically. I want to start by talking about books, because books is what led me into the craft traditions. I started embroidering because there was a project that I wanted to embroider, and I won't show you pictures of those early books because they looked really different. And in fact, I'm sometimes a little sad that I can't get back to that, like naive kind of art mark making with embroidery. But I didn't grow up in a family that did a lot of sewing. I like to joke that my grandmother was an accountant. And so didn't really come to craft through that way, but I was interested in making art, and as I was making this project, it really started with a pun. You can see that the illustrations and the covers and the interior of the books are all hand embroidered, and I called this series Common Threads. I started it 22 years ago, and I'm working now on volume 155 of this series. And to explain a little bit, I've just realized that my notes are all in French, but I don't need them because I'm just speaking to you from the heart. But I started this project. Of course, they do resemble facsimiles of notebooks. I call them common threads because they're about the coincidences that occur in my reading. And so I know that all of us have this experience where maybe you learn a new word and then suddenly you hear it everywhere, right? Well, what was happening to me and continues to happen to me is that I would read an unusual phrase like antique dental instrument, and then I would read it in another book, like immediately afterwards. And so, of course, I was writing these things down and kind of marveling at the universe, like trying to show me this unusual thing, like why stuffed mountain lion? Why is that in 2 books back to back? Or black currant lozenge was a good one. So, but this happens to me continually. And this book in particular is called Napoleon's Wallpaper. And this was the first time that I lived in France. Every time I would leave my apartment, someone would ask me, where is Napoleon? And I learned that question in so many different languages because people would say like, où est Napoleon? And I figured out that I was living across the street from Napoleon's tomb. And so when I finally got that clear, I was like, oh, he's right over there, right? So I had to make a book about it. So this project continued, and you can tell from the cover illustrations always, because of course I started out sewing the composition pattern that we're all so familiar with, and I did it in every color possible. And at about book 25, I realized, okay, I've got to branch out and think about the other patterns that I can kind of harvest from the content of the book. So everything from purple puppies to coral. And at this point, I think I've gotten to be a little bit better of an embroiderer. But my impulse to create books that combined imagery and text didn't end with this project. And I was interested in also continuing to make large-scale installations. And I'm going to show a little bit of that, but a lot of the work that I did that's not craft related, I've omitted from this presentation because I do want to talk mostly about craft today in this setting. One of the things that drew me to craft was the accessibility of the materials. I was living in a rural area and we didn't really have access to fine art supplies, fine art materials, but I always had access to craft supplies. And I also found that it was accessible in another way, in that when people would see me doing it, they recognized it and they had associations with it. And so it's also very mobile. I can put this in my pocket and take it with me anywhere I'm going. And so I used to sort of identify as a bookmaker. Like, what do you do? I'm a book artist. And now I'm maybe a little bit less concerned about identifying so heavily with books forward, but I still love to make a book, even if it's an editioned book. And once I had a show next door at Lawndale Art Center, and I got the greatest compliment of my life, which was someone said to me, "Your artwork is so Scooby-Doo." And this is because that show had a lot of hidden things in it. In this case, this is a book that can really only be read by wearing a pair of red glasses that allows you to see the hidden text underneath the pattern of ants. And this idea of making artwork that's Scooby-Doo has definitely, I started to write notes. I did realize that the notes were in French before I got here, so I was kind of not being fully transparent with you. But so I was like scrambling to write a few things down before I came, and I basically just was like, okay, common threads, Scooby-Doo. And so that's the main thing that I want to talk about, is that with this exhibition that I did at Blue Star Contemporary in San Antonio, I wanted us to expand the book so that viewers could walk in and among the pages. One of the things that's great about a book is that it's really personal. You make it and you give it to one other person, and that one other person reads it alone. And that's what's really nice and intimate about book arts. But it's very different when it's in a gallery setting. So thinking about how these things operate differently in a gallery, and the fact that people are going to have more of a collective reading experience, I definitely started to think too about how that experience can change things. And at the Blue Star, I think now they're called the Contemporary at Blue Star, so they've changed their name since I did this show, and I don't want to call them the wrong thing. But for a little while, every time I was offered to do a show in a space, I said kind of an odd question, but I was like, can I get inside your walls? And I got a lot of no's. Like, what are you talking about? Like, can you get inside the, like, what I meant by that was, may I have access to the interior of the walls? Like, is there a way for us to get inside the walls? And at this show, they said yes. So in addition to having this book that was on display down the center of the room, and all of the illustrations and the letters are embroidered, they did tell me, actually, this back wall opens onto our preparatory space, so you 100% can put stuff in the walls. And one of the other things that I really love are miniatures. And so I installed some dioramas in the back wall of the gallery that had little discreet peepholes and allowed people to view this other space. And in a way, this space became the illustrations for the book that was down the middle of the room. This show is called Secret Passage, and I'm sorry, I just love a pun. And for me, Secret Passage has this double meaning. Not only was it a a hidden space, a hidden room. And if you look closely at the diorama in the middle, you can see that there's an opening behind the bookcase that it pulls open to, and there's also an opening behind the fireplace. So it's a secret passage also in the fact that the text reveals a hidden text. What's the word? The plot of the book itself was about a person who finds herself living alone. Weirdly, I composed this before the pandemic, so I may also be a psychic in addition to like collecting coincidences. But she discovers that as she's reading, someone has come along in the books that she's reading and has underlined certain passages. And it turns out that that is a code that she's able to uncover. And so Secret Passage, it allowed me to explore that Scooby-Doo side of me. And then I continued that with a show of dioramas. And this one is a mouthful. This was a show that I did at Women in Their Work, and it was many, many murder scenes. Like a lot of us, I'm sort of fascinated by our fascination with true crime, and especially the ways that that seeps into fiction. And I gave myself I'm resting on my friend Julie looking at that for a long time, but everybody who saw the show had these little flashlights and little guidebooks so that they could sort of act as detective uncovering these little crime scenes. I gave myself a job, which was for 9 months, the time it takes to gestate a child, I guess. I would read only murder mysteries. And what I discovered, not only just a ton of coincidences, but also rampant ageism, sexism, and other kinds of discrimination, racism. And so I found that there were a lot of social issues that came to the light. And so I embedded some of these as clues into these murder scenes. And there's also, don't worry, there's no gore in this presentation, because what I found was that a lot of the entertainments that we get from murder fiction or from true crime, it's really quite banal, right? You know, it's like, oh, there's a baseball bat. I guess we know what that's going to be about, right? But playing with this smaller scale, I think, and I actually read this yesterday, that miniatures allow us to take something in as a whole instead of noticing it in its parts. And I'm not sure if I agree with that 100%, but maybe we can talk about it after. Another thing that crops up in reading a lot of murder mysteries is, and this is really maddening, and I don't know, we can tell by nods of the head if you've come across something like this, but one of the things that was happening is that the author would say, and then we went downstairs and we found a secret passage. And no description of how, so you can see there I have the little outline of the wall that gives way. But it's like, well, if you just walk downstairs and you found the secret passage, is it a secret passage? What is it, hidden? Like, what is this? And so there's just a lot of sort of laziness and strangeness. And I read a lot of actually pretty bad books, even though I did try to read, Agatha Christie and like high quality mystery. But it wasn't great. Well, so then I also did want to represent the victims. And so reflecting on this talk today, I realized that embroidery is not the only craft that I harvest for my artwork. And I created the representations of the victims through papercraft. And so I'm going to quickly show these, but these are low relief constructions made out of paper where I was able to represent the various victims of the crimes. And so they have names like, stabbing, poisoning. This one's called bludgeoned. This one is cause unknown. And so I said it's not really gruesome, but I guess, until you start to think about what I'm actually showing you. So these works were shown together with the miniature dioramas. And I think this is from both a Mary Higgins Clark novel, but also Don't Take a Cruise. Like it seems like if a book starts out on a cruise, like somebody's going overboard, like that's, or there will be pirates. Like that's a totally other discussion. Like I'm so afraid of pirates. I realized that I can talk about these like craft traditions all coming together in this work. So, but then the pandemic happened, and I realized for the first time that I was having a much more difficult time writing the stories that had populated a lot of my exhibitions, because that's another thing that people say when they come to my shows is, oh, there's a lot of reading here. So, because I always have copious amounts of text. And many times my exhibitions would come with a guidebook so that people could read the same things that I was reading and uncovering the same coincidences that I was uncovering. And so I was drawing a blank, literally. And being confronted with a blank piece of paper is every artist or writer's nightmare, and I am both. And so I started to create these drawings of notebook paper, and one of the things that was great about it is I just kept having more ideas for drawings of notebook paper. And at this point, I've made hundreds of these. I call them notes for string theory, and they've really been very generative for me in that sense that I no longer feel blocked. And eventually I did return to writing and figured out maybe some things that I wanted to say about the pandemic and about what it was like to live through that. Not that I think I have the definitive answer to that. And then eventually I did write a book. It's hard to tell the scale. It's like a much bigger book, about the same size as that one that you could see hanging. And I used some little glass beads to create the COVID virus itself on the cover of this book, String Theory. And then I want to be sure to save time for questions, because that's my favorite part. I like to know what people are curious about. But I'll show a few installation shots of what my installations look like in the current period, because now there's just so much more sewing and lots of embroidery. This is the first time that I did an installation that was all sewn. I guess that's a way to say all textile work is another way to say it. So these are images from Ivester, and the last two shows that I've done there have been embroidery work, with the exception of a writing machine and some books that look like VHS cassettes, but they are books actually. And so, yeah, I think I will tell a quick story about this piece, and then I'll see if you guys have any questions. This is a 3-part story, and this is sort of my first foray into writing fiction. I started out with a true story, and I'll try to tell it really fast because it sounds really implausible, and I don't want you guys to run me out of here when you realize what I'm going to say. But at my first job when I was 19, it was at a Blockbuster Video, and my boss was a 15-year-old, and I didn't know that he was 15 at the time. He was very tall. He was very big and very tall. Maybe the biggest man I've ever known. And he pulls me aside one day because we were very bored, as you get in retail, right? And he said to me, so I'm actually 15, and I have gigantism, and I ran away from home, and I've been working here now for a year. I was like, you're the manager. You hired me. And shortly after that, he disappeared from my life forever. It was a very strange thing. It was raining really hard one night, and at the time, I didn't have a car. I rode a bicycle. And he says to me, I'll give you a ride home, but I want to run an errand first. This is the story of this quilt. Like, I'm not just this is what's in the quilt, right? So I'll give you a ride home, but I need to run an errand. and I would feel a lot better if you would come with me. And I was like, okay, like, what is this going to be about? And so I agreed, get in the car with him, and very quickly, I have no idea where we are. It's just very heavy rain. You guys, if you're from Houston or lived here long enough, you know what that's like. And the police pull us over almost immediately. Or I'm assuming the police, all I saw was flashing lights, right? He starts to get out of the car. And I was like, oh, no. And I grabbed him. I said, no, this isn't how it works. You're only 15. You don't realize, like, you can't. And I realized, oh, yeah, and he has a fake license because he showed it to me. So I'm panicking. And also, I will fully disclose, I was full-on sobbing. He said, no, everything is okay. And he took a package out from under my seat in a brown paper bag, roughly the size of a VHS tape, goes behind the car, comes back really drenched without the package. That was the last time I saw him. And my regional manager was back at the store when I went back into work. And she says, yeah, we had to fire Ron. He was stealing from the store. And also, you won't believe this, he was only 15 years old. Don't tell anyone. Okay, so that's a really great place for me to open the floor for questions. And, anybody want to ask me anything? Yeah.
What tools or practices help you make so much work like that, or like ergonomics, or like
push-ups really help. And I'm not joking. I appreciate that question, and I do really think that that's an important one, because when we're trying to maintain a practice and live, we don't want to do something where we can't do it anymore. I consulted with a yoga instructor once to talk about that, and she noticed that I was doing a lot of asymmetry in my sewing, like pulling one hand up, and so for a little while I was trying to do like opposite actions, and that made me feel really silly, and it wasn't working. But my hands are often curved inward, and so doing push-ups like every hour or two, stopping to do 10 push-ups, pushes my wrists back, and that helps a lot. So yeah, that's a great and practical question. Thank you. Anybody else? I'm keeping an eye on time. I don't want to step on Kendall.
what is your Fulbright about?
So thank you. So for the Fulbright, I had lived in France 20 years ago. My son was born in France 20-ish years ago, and I was eager to return, and I was also really excited by the fact that France is the only nation in the world that has codified the right to an abortion in their constitution. And I wanted to make a project about reproductive health care. And so collecting stories about reproductive health care from other people, I've been collecting them, and also too, I'm still collecting them, so if anyone wants to contribute, I'm collecting those stories and embroidering them and making every attempt to recreate the contributor's handwriting. And so not only am I telling other people's stories, but I'm trying to do it in their own handwriting. And I'm still assembling it, but that's what I was working on when I was there. The region that I was in is one that has a history of textile production that goes back to the Middle Ages. So, yeah. And maybe one more question? Yeah?
You talk a lot about the writing, and I'm assuming the writing happens before the embroidery and the writing is finished. Do you feel like your relationship to the text and the writing changes as you're going through the embroidery process?
No, in fact, so I do typically write everything out. For certain projects, I don't edit the text beforehand. So like for those books that I showed at the beginning, I make the blank pages and then I sit down and write them out in pencil on the textile, and that's how I compose them. Because I don't want to over-edit them. I want them to feel like a journal entry. I want them to feel spontaneous. But once I start sewing, I actually sew from right to left, like because of I'm right-handed, and so my sewing goes. So I don't compose with a needle. Yeah. Yes, I could. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry.
When you're actually doing the embroidery, do you ever like make typos?
Yes. Yes. I think my son used to joke with me and call them so-yos or something like. But I will simply put an X in thread and write the new letter in the margins, unless I catch it really early, and then I'll back out threads. But yeah. And some things get by me for sure. There's definitely spelling errors, and yes.
So a lot of stories are pulling you out of the space you're in, and in your studio you have a much bigger piece that's kind of like imposing on the space.
Yeah.
How does that change your relationship to the works as you like think about installations as opposed to these stories that are kind of like transporting you out of the space by reading them?
Yeah, I find it really, so the work that's in my studio is in progress, and I don't know that I've fully figured out what it means yet, but I do invite all of you to come and, mine is the first studio here, so if you'd like to take a peek as we're leaving and see what I'm working on now, I very intentionally didn't include any pictures of the things that are in progress now because it's not finished and it's here, so you can see it in person. I'd really love for you to, and help me figure out what it means, because that'll help me the next time I have to stand in front of a group of people and tell them what's going on. But I'm gonna turn over time because I'm right at the halfway mark. But thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Candace made a great point that I was going to mention to you earlier, that both artist studios will be open after the talk so you can see their works in person. Okay, so our next artist is Kendall Ross, who's a contemporary textile artist based in Oklahoma City, known for her hand-knit, text-based works that explore themes of identity, memory, and gender. Raised in a family of women makers, she draws on generational craft traditions and lived experiences to create intimate, narrative-driven fiber arts. She holds a BA in history from Pepperdine University and has exhibited nationally with shows at the Pacific Northwest Quilt and Fiber Arts Museum, at the Corey Creo in Santa Fe. She's also completed residencies at the Banff Center and Penland School of Craft, and was an accompanying artist for the co-ed objects at the Projects and Kunsthistories Institute in Florence. Her work has been featured in High Fructose, Colossal, Fiber Arts Now, and Glamour. I'm going to turn it over to you, Kendall.
Perfect. I don't know why I brought my phone. Can I hand this to somebody? Who do I trust? Sorry. My bad. Hi, I'm Kendall. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you to the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft for having me, not just today, but until the end of May, which is exciting. And thank you all for being here. I am very excited. My name is Kendall, although I am sometimes better known to people as I'd Knit That, which is my project name or my Instagram name, whatever you want to call it. I am a textile artist from Oklahoma City, and I hand knit both wearable functional work and more larger scale non-functional work. And my plan for today is to get into all of that and talk about my background, how I make what I make, why I make it, and then share a little bit about what I'm doing here in the great city of Houston, Texas. If we're good with that. Yes. Yeehaw. I'm curious, before I get too far into everything, how many people in here either knit or crochet? I'm going to guess a lot. Yeah. These are my people. And I will say, I knit, obviously, and for those of you who knit or crochet or who do any sort of craft, you're probably used to getting one of 3 or 4 questions if somebody sees you wearing something that you've knit or you're actively knitting in public, which is the worst is, will you make me something, which is automatically. And another one that's not great is, how long did it take? But the best for a lot of us, and for me, is when people ask, how did you get into this? How did you learn how to knit? And for me, it's these 2 ladies right here with baby Kendall in this photo. That is my mom and my maternal grandmother. So I grew up in a family where all of the women were actively creating and making things and doing it at an incredibly high level. Like, I don't think we ever got together as a family, bless you, when they weren't, quilting or crocheting or embroidering, the punch needling. When bedazzling was big, they got really into that. which I loved, still do. And so I grew up in that environment where they would get together and they would make things, but then they would also be telling family stories and family histories and gossiping and just having a really good time. And so I very much looked up to them and wanted to be in those circles and be with them. And so when I was about 6 years old, my grandma Pat plopped me down and taught me how to crochet. And she did just do the basics. I wasn't a prodigy, although I believed I was. Genuinely, I was like, I'm good with chain stitch. That's all I need. I got it from here. But throughout my life, I've just gravitated toward things like crochet, and then eventually, after some tough times trying to teach myself on YouTube how to knit, learned at a local yarn store in Oklahoma City the basics of knitting, just how to cast on, how to knit, cast off. But aside from that, have been entirely self-taught and just have been very obsessed with the practice of hand knitting. Although I did work at the yarn store that I learned how to knit at when I was in high school, and the owner did not remember me because she called me Kendra for years. And I never corrected her, which is my fault, but she helped me out a lot. So my path of life of trying to figure out what I was going to do, I knew that I had this love of the women in my family getting together and also this act of creation with knitting. And I never once considered going to art school because I genuinely didn't know people did that for things that weren't painting. And I also vaguely knew people went to design school because I loved Project Runway. I was like, everyone goes to Parsons. That's where they film the show. And so I took the part of knitting that I loved that wasn't the actual making, which was the stories and the family history, and got my degree in what was essentially American women's history. And during that time, focused a lot of my personal research and my thesis on women's knitting movements during World War I. Woo! I thought that. Not a lot of other people in my program thought it was that exciting, but for me it was so interesting to look into this time that was so interesting and complicated, where you had these groups of women who were getting together to knit for troops that were fighting abroad, but it was also very segregated, where white women wouldn't knit with black women and they wouldn't knit for black troops at this very pivotal time in American history for women and in general. And so for me, that has drastically shaped my work now that I am a professional artist, not in the sense that I'm Miss Historian sitting with primary sources day in and day out, but it gave me this greater appreciation for craft and for knitting and for the importance of what it means in my own family history, but also in the larger context of American women's history, and has given me a deep perspective that craft and knitting is very political and gendered and can't be removed from those conversations. It's not just this thing that is frivolous and silly that your grandma does and everyone kind of pokes fun at it. It's this very powerful act that holds a lot of value for women and for communities and for art. And this is propaganda that they put out to get people to knit, which also complicates it a little bit, but I love this because this is how I see myself when I'm knitting. I don't know how true that is, but so that's a little bit about my background. Now, let's get into how I make things. We good with that? Yeah, I love the approval. That's awesome. So when I go to make a piece, all of my work is essentially text-based. I do a lot of writing, a lot of journaling. I talk to myself a lot and put it in my notes app, genuinely. So it all comes from this very authentic, emotional place of text, and I build upon that. So sometimes you have a piece like this that is entirely text, where I wrote this section of text and that is what I went in and put on the piece. And to do that, it's not this kind of beautiful, intuitive process. It's very much mathematical and planned out in a more intense way than I wish it was. So when I'm going in to make a piece, I will take the text and then individually plot each stitch on what is essentially digital graph paper on my computer, where each square on this chart aligns with one stitch on the piece, whatever it is that I'm making. So sometimes it is just text, and then other times I will build imagery around it to kind of align with what I think the core message of what the text is. So then, once I have the chart, what I do is I take 2 very long needles in some cases when I'm making more large-scale work, or just normal knitting needles, and then use many, many balls of yarn at once and knit from usually the bottom up, line by line, going like this. And so sometimes it's 20, 25 balls of yarn at once for some of the more intricate things that I'm swapping around. And I use a combination of intarsia, which is bigger chunks of color. If you think of like checkerboard, you're not crossing the yarns over, you're kind of interlocking them up the back. And then this would be something that would be more like stranded color work or Fair Isle. If you have any of those like intense Scandinavian looking sweaters, if you flip them on the inside, you can see the yarn being carried up the back. And so that's what this is. And I use them in combination with each other to get the text and the images knit into the fabric the way that I need them to be. So I'm going to talk mainly, and I'm going to talk about my non-functional work. Sorry, am I blocking you? I feel bad. Can you see? I'm going to talk mostly about my non-functional large-scale work, but I have to talk about my wearable work because it's such an important part of my practice, and I don't like put one over the other because I think all of it is very important and necessary for what I do. And for me, these are two vests that I made somewhat recently. This is one that I come back to quite a bit and will knit a lot, just the same chart over and over again because it feels kind of ever present in what I do. But for me, the goal of making wearable work is to take these very personal inside feelings and put them on something that somebody will wear on their body out into the world to do everyday tasks or to get coffee or meet up with friends. And to me, that's exciting that these pieces of wearable art get to exist outside of what are traditional art spaces. It's very easy to go into a gallery or a museum and see something with the little, placard with the artist's name and talking about them and understand that those things are art, but to put them out into the world where normal people will encounter them on a day-to-day basis is exciting for me, and especially when the text is more personal and vulnerable for me to have strangers wear those pieces and kind of accept and own those feelings, I think is validating for me, but also is kind of a special thing that people can see themselves in something and then can own those in the world. I don't wear them though. I don't own any of my own pieces that have text on them. I don't want somebody to see me while I'm ordering coffee wearing a vest that's like, I'm miserable, ask me about it. People ask me that a lot. I'm like, I don't wear them, not for me. I love them, not for me though. So it's my functional work, which I love as well. Y'all ready to get into my non-functional work? Woo! So this is a piece that I made last year, and something that I've really been experimenting with and doing a lot lately is kind of pushing the scale of garments. I love the process of making a garment. Obviously, I make a lot of wearable work, but I think even when I was a kid and I was first learning how to knit, the thing that I dreamed of was like, oh my goodness, someday I want to make a sweater. So now it's exciting to be able to make those things and to make them in a way that feels a little bit more effortless. For me, in scaling up what should be a functional object, right? We're used to seeing sweaters and we think, oh, that will keep me warm, or I will wear that for fashion or for whatever. And to remove the function from them, I find really interesting, especially when we're considering these questions of gender. I think with women, we're very used to them having some sort of utility in our lives, whether it's their physical or emotional labor, or we kind of put them into categories of like, oh, she's a mother or a wife or a sister, not just a person. So I think thinking about those things to make these pieces that have genuinely no purpose except to look at them and take up space has been really interesting to me. So this is there room for anyone else? And it's the same design on the front and the back, but I just took away some room on the back because I thought that was funny. I also think it's funny to kind of play around with people's big perceptions of art versus craft, of, something is wearable, so it's craft. But if you make it a little bit bigger, then it's art. I just think that's funny that, people see this and be like, what an artist. And then you go one slide back and you'll be like, what a wonderful craftswoman she is. Like, that's ridiculous to me, but I think it's funny to play with that as well. A big vest. Another element of my work that I've hinted on a little bit is vulnerability, and in the way that with the scale, I'm kind of pushing the boundaries of size and what is possible with hand knitting. I think another goal of my work is to kind of push the boundaries of vulnerability and emotion. I think if you know me in my day-to-day life, I'm kind of a chiller. I'm not super emotional the way that you might think if you see some of my work where you probably picture me, crying in a corner, which sometimes, you never know. But for me, knitting is a space where I am able to essentially feel things to the fullest extent. And I think a lot of times we have emotions that we kind of feel shame over, like, oh my goodness, that is dramatic or too much, or I will sound irrational. And for me, knitting is that arena where everything is fair game because I'm in control. I control not the reaction to it, but I control the way that it's portrayed. And so for me, this is what I would consider to be one of my more vulnerable pieces, even though it is a short section of text. I think a lot of the imagery connects to things that I was thinking about in relation to the text that feels very much like looking back on memories and experiences that I had growing up that have kind of shaped the way that I view myself today. So I love this piece. You should like your own work, right? Life lesson. This is a piece that I made last year over the course of about 9 months, which kind of like you were saying, Candace, about, the time to gestate a child. I told people, I was like, 9 months, it's like my baby. And they thought I was kidding, and I was not. I wanted to spend 9 months working on one piece. And for me, this work is my largest piece to date, but I feel like it kind of encapsulates a lot of what I was saying about pushing scale and taking up space, and also seeing how emotional and vulnerable you can be. And for me, this is an object that kind of took everything out of me, the physical labor and the emotions of kind of like a diary of 9 months of my life from October to July of 2025, October 2024 to July of 2025. And the front aligns with each back piece where each represents a day of those 9 months, and then the bed that I slept in that night with the location. So it alternates between my home bed in Oklahoma City, which are these pink ones, and then other places. This is when I was in Dollywood, so that was a huge moment for me. And then, sleeping on my friend's couch or being in another bed. And for me, this just feels like kind of the core of putting yourself out there in every way, of essentially this object taking so much from me. Yeah. So those are kind of more garment-based things that I've been working on that are non-functional. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a new direction that my work has taken over the last year or so. I did a show last year in September 2025 called As For Me in My House. I've spent a lot of time lately reading and thinking a lot about kind of evangelical culture. I grew up, I feel like in Texas it's very similar, but I grew up kind of in very evangelical spaces in Oklahoma. And I think in the way that kind of the world is now, with those cultural values of evangelicalism kind of seeping into politics and education, and our, the way that people are making rules about what we can and can't do with our bodies and with sexuality. I've been thinking a lot about the way that environment has impacted me still to this day, even removed from those spaces. And so on the left, I made a very text-based church pew. It's actually stuffed with yarn that I collected, my leftover yarn that I collected from making the In Bed With Me piece. And my mom actually helped me build the base for this on the left, so she's still doing these craft things with me to this day. And then these are kind of this is one of a series of underwear. I made some more male underwear and then several panties. Somebody actually told me if I was nervous today, I should picture everyone wearing these. So I didn't need to, I'm good. But yeah, so this is a direction where I've spent a lot of time thinking about kind of evangelical culture and the impact of that, which has led me to my project here in Houston, where kind of my big goal is inspired by a lot of driving around in the Bible Belt in Oklahoma, seeing kind of mysterious, vague evangelical billboards that have text that could be taken in a lot of different ways. And so I'm very interested in creating work that has that same mysterious aspect to it, of how much longer could mean something completely different to somebody, thinking that in the context of how much longer till Jesus comes back, or for other people, how much longer until climate change gets us, or how much longer will these people be in power. And so I think for me, these signs are kind of carrying over a lot of things that I obviously think about a lot with garments as walking billboards for values and things that you believe in, feelings, into these pieces. So these are smaller signs that are in my studio now that are kind of preparing me for my big goal of making a big billboard eventually that will be full scale. I don't have details on it, and it's just still a big idea, so don't ask for any, because I don't know. But that's my big goal, and that's what I'm working on here, is these smaller signs in preparation for doing something bigger someday. And now I'm ready to take some questions. Yes?
Can you make me something?
No. Open up your wallet, maybe. Yes.
I guess our
Oh,
first
sorry.
question is, what is that phone number on the?
Thank you.
That was my question.
Yes, okay. I'm the kind of person, I probably would have put my own phone number because I'm a little bit crazy. But this is a Google voice number that I set up, so you can call it. And my goal, hopefully, is to have a large billboard or have these somewhere where people can call in and I can collect some crazy voicemails from people, seeing them, kind of sharing. Or maybe I'll take the voicemails and knit them into other pieces, but call it. Give me some feedback. Just kidding. Hi.
What's your favorite yarn to work with?
Good question. I use the same yarn for everything. I use Wool of the Andes by Knit Picks, which is basic and maybe not. Actually, I don't want to cut this from the video. I don't want them to hear it. But I mean, there's obviously higher quality yarns, but for me, in what I do, I kind of set the standard of that's the yarn that I will use. And if you go in my studio, I have a big stash of it just because I've collected it. Because to do this level of color work, it requires just so many different colors that I've committed myself to them. Is that what you use? Is that why you're laughing?
That's what I started using. I like it.
I love it. I'm a fan.
But you do that because it keeps the weight the same and the texture.
Yeah,
and that just
yeah,
unifies.
Yeah, it's all wool too, and I like it because it doesn't, like, these have been washed before I stretch them onto the wood, and they don't bleed into the white, which is important to me because I usually use white as a base for most of what I do. Yes?
How do you pick like what colors you're going to use in your works?
Some of it will come down to what I have available, if I'm trying to just use what I've got, and then other times it's just more intuitive. I think there's a lot of colors that come up consistently throughout my work that, like, there's always a lot of pink and orange and green and blue, so those are always pretty present, along with white and black. There's not a lot of purple or red, so if you're ever looking.
So when you're working on something that has so many different colors, how do you not get all those different colors tangled up together?
I don't. They get very tangled. Sometimes if I know I'm going to be like these, this was knit in sections, but because it was smaller, I would move them around. So you can put one on top of the other and then move them. But other times, like on the sign on the left, I just kind of let them run wild. Because I was like, I'll cut it eventually. Won't be tangled forever. Yes.
Are you knitting English style or some other style?
I knit English, yeah, which sometimes surprises people because I knit quite a bit. And I'm pretty fast, and so I think people assume it's continental, but I've always knit English, and that's just kind of what makes the most sense for me in my hand.
What's the difference between the two?
So English is like holding it in your right hand, whereas continental is more like the yarn is in your left hand, and so I don't necessarily believe this, but a lot of people think continental is faster. There's some historical things with people switching over from one to the other I don't take this out of the video too, in case I'm wrong. I think there's something about like people switching because one was more associated with Germans at one point for the war, and so people like made the switch, but I could be wrong. So don't look it up for yourself. Yeah. Yes.
You have a very distinct font in your knitting. How did you come up with that? And I think it conveys a lot of emotion as well. Is that part of your intention?
Like this one?
Yes.
I think when you're working with knitting, you're so constrained to the amount of stitches, and so I think for me, this is just kind of what, at one point, I started doing specifically on the vest to fit within the framework that I had for the stitches, and it's just kind of become customary for me. It kind of looks like the SpongeBob font to me. Yeah. So that's kind of always what I think of, but it's kind of essentially my handwriting. Like if you look at like my normal handwriting, it looks similar to this when it's in all caps. That's a good question. Yes.
Do you duplicate stitch anything on?
I'm a duplicate stitch hater. Sorry guys. Sorry. And part of that is because I like to be good at things and I'm not very good at it. There's people who are really good at it. Like I see people all the time who make beautiful tapestries out of it. Even if something like this small, these are still like stranded and I'll just carry it along the back because that's just my preference. Any other questions? Yes.
How do your mom and grandmother feel about the way your career has taken shape?
Well, unfortunately, my grandma passed when I was in high school, which is something I think about a lot because I feel like she would love all of this, but my mom loves it. Tammy's a big fan. Yeah, she helps me quite a bit. I feel like I talked about with the pew, but in general, especially like when I was first being like, I might want to do this, she was always like helping me quite a bit as far as like displaying things and helping me take photos and all of that. So she is incredibly supportive. Yeah, she does great stuff. I should have included some photos of Tammy sewing next time. Next talk will be my mom. Yeah.
I know you kind of touched on this in a lot of your themes in your work with this, but like the craft versus like like what's considered like art and everything, and then also like you have a very like strong social media presence. So how do you navigate both like the viewpoint of like crafting or like social media artists versus like
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a really important question, but.
No, I get what you're saying. I think for me, in the same way that I don't think there has to be a strong divide between, craft versus art, I also think that there's so many good parts of social media. Like, I think a lot of you probably know of my work because of social media, which is such a strength. And, even like Candace, we connected on social media before we even like met in person. I think for me, the part that I think makes things feel more real in a sense of like not everything is online is, getting to meet real people and have real connections with other artists, because I think it could be very isolating to just be online. But that's true for everything. So I don't know if that answered your question well or not.
I don't know if I formed it well.
Well, either way, we're good. I appreciated it though. Yes.
Could you describe, and this question might be for Candace too, could you just describe the space that's your own studio?
At home?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, how,
yeah.
I'm curious how, because these are both somewhat solitary pursuits, do you ever work in community with other people, like being in a yarn store, or is your space kind of a sacrosanct?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, my studio is my dining room table most of the time. So it's usually me alone, especially when I'm working on these bigger projects. I need a table to spread out. So it's just me and then my basset hound is staring at me most of the time. But I enjoy working, like if I have, projects that don't require a lot of, spreading out, I enjoy working with other people too. But when I'm doing something complicated, it is like head down working. You want to answer that one too?
I prefer to be the passenger in a car, public transportation, or my bed.
That's funny. Okay. I don't know how much time I have. Yes.
Whenever you post something online that I see that's really busy, I love trying to decipher all of your little pictures. My favorite is your Texas shaped waffle. I don't know. Do you have a particular favorite, like silly little thing that you've included in something?
Ooh. Okay. I don't know if you can see it. You probably can't see it because it's pretty tiny. In some of these are like obviously scenes of my room and other rooms. In a lot of them you can see I have like right here, I have a cup, like it's not a Stanley cup, it's Brahms themed, but that's in some of them, and that's one that I like because it's very tiny and only I really know, like, oh, that's your Brahms branded Stanley cup. So, but I think in general there's a lot of chairs. I love a chair. Yeah, it kind of just depends on what I'm making. So, okay, is that it? Should I, one more?
We have more time if there's
Okay.
questions. Are there any more questions?
Anyone else? Yes.
Are there like certain artists
I feel like that's always such an interesting question because off the top of my head, it's like, this sounds bad, but I like no.
Yeah.
That sounds awful because there obviously are like so many people that I look up to, but I think even this piece on the left was something that I have thought about quite a bit when people ask me that question, because when I think of everyone in my life who has inspired me the most, it's people who like you've never heard of, because it's like just normal people who have helped me and who are making work for themselves or for other people very privately and quietly, which there's space for everything, but I think that's probably it probably is just like my mom and my grandma. That wasn't a great answer, but that's a great question. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious to hear from both of you, like, what do you do, like, do you have a craft pursuit that you do when you're not working? So like this is work, but like, do you do something kind of separate to just like do something more casually?
Do you?
I like to cook. I think that's maybe like the only thing that sort of counts as a hobby. And then reading. I mean, I read a lot because I'm always looking for coincidences, and I think literature, even like the answer to the previous question, like I think rather than referencing a lot of artists, I reference a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Do you have a hobby?
No. I don't know. I don't have any this morning I was sitting there in my studio, I did like 3 rows of double crochet. I was like, this is fun. And I was like, I don't know. I have hobbies that are, no. I started talking like no. I mean, I have things I enjoy, but I would say I'm very obsessed with knitting in a very real way. So anytime I have time, this is what I like to do because I love it so much. That might not be the healthiest mental health thing to have one thing, but it's my honest answer. Okay.
Okay, well,
Should we call
thank
it?
you so much, Kendall.
Thank you.
Well, thank everyone for coming out today and all of your wonderful questions. Thank you both to Candace and Kendall, who you still have 2 more months to catch them in their studio, and they'll both be in their studios as well after this talk, so please go check them out. I just want to mention that we'll have one more resident artist talk this spring on May 9th with Mulaney Barnett and Katie McGovern, who are Mulaney's a ceramic artist, and Katie's a fiber artist who's also working with vessels. They're both at the Clay Conference in Seco this weekend, so their studios are not open, so please come back May 9th to see them all. Thank you all. Bye.